5 panelists, 5 topical issues, no holds barred.
For me, it's not knowledge that's lacking. It's that greed, it's that mentality where you feel you deserve to take your own and take it infinitely and let everybody else just manage however they will manage.
We're almost becoming hardwired to try and cheat. I would, suggest that we begin to hold our leaders accountable.
There was a time in this country when things actually work.
I don't think that any organization should be above the law. And I think one of the challenges we have in this country is about governance across the board.
What I'm saying is that it doesn't really affect us in Nigeria. That's really
It does.
I don't know what we can do if the system is already corrupted.
We've been warned as a continent of the influx of the Chinese. If you don't repay your debt, they will just colonize you.
Welcome to The Advocates, where we confront issues of truth and the way forward, heads on, no hold bar. Emeka connects remotely and is taking stock of the deadly cost of incompetence, and I'm sure it will be a pricey one. Ekene is also calling a spade a spade. She says we all need to take responsibility for the increasing numbers of motherless babies, and with the lockdown, definitely the numbers will be more. David Hondeyi, a fresh face but a veteran to advocacy, will be proving that the pen is mightier than the sword as he frames a debate on which he says all our futures hinges on. I wait to hear that. I'll be laying down the gauntlet by saying I won't want peace but equal right and justice, and I'll be saying much more after the break. According to the great song of late reggae artist Peter Tosh, everyone is crying out for peace here. None is crying out for justice. I don't want no peace, but equal rights and justice. Rivers of wickedness is my topic today. Before I begin, please permit me to salute some of our latest emperors in Nigeria for making our society a laughingstock. I salute our Supreme Court for not allowing a big man like Ojuzo Kalu to stay for too long in prison by asking the Federal High Court to start his trial afresh on grounds of technicalities. Some people might have to turn to Ogun, Uchi, Alika, and Amadioha to get justice soon. As lawyers, we should be concerned. What's the guarantee that the next trial judge will not be elevated, transferred, or retired before delivering judgment after 12 years of trial? Ma mini jam questions, that's the way they say it in Yoruba. I salute our emperor ancestors, former head of state, General Sani Abacha, for always coming to our aid with huge cash anytime we seem broke. As barely a week after helping to repatriate $311 million, that's about 118 billion naira, stolen by the late head of state, the United States says there's a separate $319 million, that's about 121 billion naira, Abacha loot in the United Kingdom and France. How come we're not bothered about looking for people who helped Abacha take out this fund? Or maybe they are busy helping others take out more fund presently. But they should remember, like Abacha, they might just be sending the country money from the graveyard. I also want to salute Governor Erufai of Kaduna for looking the other way when Fulani bandits descended on a town called Gonanrogo and Meyaki of Idom ward of Kajare local government of the state, even after SOS was sent by inhabitants and their representatives. With killings like this, I think this is a wake-up call also for us to begin to discuss state policing once again and proper federal structure. Now, I want to salute Governor Wike of Rivers State, for his outrageous display of irresponsibility in being the lawmaker, prosecutor, judge, and executor in the demolition of 2 hotels in Port Harcourt, and indiscriminate arrest of people and vehicles for violating his executive order regulation in Rivers State, even though he also subsequently violated the order in the meeting he had in a hotel with his party members. A 24-hour curfew imposed on Port Harcourt without palliative and opportunity to access food and medical facilities, despite the fact that statistics have shown that 66% of new cases in New York are those who have been indoors without any history of contact with the infected person. I think this is the time for us to begin to think outside the box to solve this pandemic. Whilst one cannot query the governor for locking down the states to curb the spread of the virus because lockdown actually worked, after all, the federal government tried the same approach in Lagos, Ogun, and Abuja until they realized the unsustainability of full impact of a continued lockdown. But the condemnable, uncivilized, and obnoxious way and manner the governor went about the enforcement of the lockdown caused to question once again the attitude and mentality of our ruler in the way they see themselves and us. Is it the demolition of Ayofele's property in Ibadan by the then constituted authority, governor of Oyo State, Abiola Ajimobi? or the demolition of Olushola Saraki's house in Ilorin by the current governor of Kwara State? How about El-Rufai's demolition of houses of opposition in Kaduna before and after the 2019 election? Not to talk of the recent demolition of a hotel known to a political opponent in Benin by the Obaseki-led administration. The list is endless. No matter the offense committed, the governor could have sealed up the place and allowed the owners have their day in court by prosecuting them. Because it is a notorious fact that executive orders, including the ones recently made by the president, no matter how well intended, cannot take the place of a valid law, not to talk of the violation of a fundamental right, without recourse to the provisions of the Constitution as to fair hearing. It's unfortunate how some of us, out of sheer politics, endorse tyranny of government and turn around to complain when it affects us or someone close to us. How on earth can someone with his right senses be endorsing the wickedness visited on the owners of this hotel? Well, like Fast says, this is Nigeria. Assuming but without conceding that the governor's executive orders are law validly made, it will still take the court to properly adjudicate and pronounce the commission of an offense pursuant to same and appropriate penalties apportioned. It is not the place of the governor to make a law, execute and adjudicate on same, as that would amount to concentrating too much power in one arm of government. And as we all know, absolute power, they say, corrupts, you be the judge of that. My advocacy today would be borrowed from the words of His Lordship, Biobele Abraham George Will, a Rivers State-born justice of the Court of Appeal, in his concurring judgment in the case of Faith Okafor and governor of Lagos State, with similar facts. According to the learned jurists, democracy thrives more on obeying and promoting the rule of law, rather than the whims and caprices of the leader against the led. We as citizens should refuse a situation where someone is put through the rigors of the criminal process for an offense not prescribed in any written law, but merely on the directive of his governor of his state. An action which, if allowed to thrive in a democracy such as ours, could confer on such office holder infinite, absolute, and autocratic powers, contrary to the clear provisions of the constitution of the land, to which both the leaders and the led are subject. For if we all refuse to allow such autocratic, absolute, and infinite power to fester, ours will be a beautiful democratic society to behold.
What comes to mind immediately or towards the end when you're reading? I made notes, so I'll probably reference my notes unless David wants to jump in. But what came to mind is the look before you leap, because I was listening to the radio and some people, a good amount of people actually, were defending Wike. And I was surprised because I said, their argument was, that we need this kind of strong arming, that Nigerians, unless you treat us like this, we won't obey the law. Right. So I'm like, you think so little of yourselves. But for now, it serves you right. You're happy for him to behave like this. Tomorrow, if you're on the receiving end of that kind of treatment, then you'll understand that this is wrong. So what you're defending and what I'll always forever defend is checks and balances, because we already have more than enough evidence that our leaders abuse it. Even when the things are even right in themselves, they still abuse it. How much more when you now leave a loophole for them to really go to town? I mean, Wike's body language, everything he's doing, he just reeks of the kind of thing you don't need in this day and age. So I'm even surprised that the federal government are letting him run riot like this. I'm not sure what they're afraid of. So the issue, I just want to quickly contextualize the issue of the 66%. I know it was said in passing in New York, because that really, I think the governor of New York accepted that lockdown works to that extent, but he did appreciate that. He was just pointing out a lot of them were minorities, and some of them, yes, they were at home, but the odd person would go and come back. So it was almost like they're bringing the infection to the home and then everybody is circulating it. So no one is saying, and I'm at pains to say this, that lockdown doesn't work, because it does. But it's whether it will be implemented well enough for it to have the desired effect. And then I like the fact that you chronicle offenders without any bias, because when you start looking at those who have demolished houses, you go through the list. So it's not like you're trying to just target one person. This is something that has a precedent. And for some reason, people have let them get away with it, which is where I'm pained. Why do you let people get away with it? You made a point the other day, which I heard you say, look, why are you now taking the man to court when you've already taken justice? You've already executed justice upon him. If anything, you owe him compensation. What if the courts then say you are wrong? Will you go and restore that building back to the way it was? So all of it is a bit backward. I have other things to say, but let me stop there.
It's funny you mentioned the fact of him acting without the support of the law. Because if you actually read the executive order that he put out, and I did a story on this a few days ago, he actually flouted his own executive order.
Oh, really?
His executive order said that the prescribed penalty for flouting the lockdown order was seizure and expropriation of the property. It did not mention demolition. So this guy literally just made it up as he was going along.
Oh, wow.
So the issue I was trying to raise in the story that I did was, if a governor in Nigeria, because we know that the Land Use Act is a fairly problematic piece piece of legislation. It was promulgated under a military government, obviously.
And we haven't modified it.
Yes, it vests all the land in a state in the governor.
Wow.
So technically, no one, the only reason we don't have more of an issue with this is that for whatever reason, governors in Nigeria have not really abused that power yet.
I'm surprised to hear that.
But with actions like this now, I think it's starting to become more and more apparent that what powers do governors in Nigeria actually have access to?
So what aspects of the Land Use Act gives them authority to demolish houses?
So I'm not so sure that he has the authority to demolish the house as such, but technically, no one in Nigeria actually owns property.
The governor holds the property in trusts for the people.
It's like the feudal
It's a
system
trustee.
in the UK.
Yes, it's a trustee. And that's why what the governor gives is a certificate
of occupancy
for you to occupy for a period of years. For a period of years. And the Constitution also, allows you to own movable and immovable properties. Okay. So for that period that you are in occupation, you are in possession, you own that property by the law. And so
what if you want to transfer it to your
if the government
heirs?
must revoke, it must have to be for overriding public interest. Overriding public interest must be clearly spelled out.
Before they take that right away from you.
And then you must also be notified within a reasonable time so that you can approach the court before that right will be taken away from you.
So you say you own it for a number of years. What happens when that
years.
After 99 years, you have to renew it?
Yes, it reverts back to
it's like the
government,
British system. Okay.
And then you renew.
Yeah.
And so within that 99 years, you can transfer your interest to anybody with the consent of the governor.
Okay.
So it's pretty simple. But what we have are situations where the governors just, for some reasons or no reasons at all, will demolish a property, even when the matter is in court, and they claim overriding public interest.
And no court has taken them.
And at the end of, in most cases, there are damages, but these damages are not paid from their pockets. It is from the state coffers, from the taxpayers' money.
So no lesson is learned.
Exactly.
Emeka, are you joining us on this? Are you there?
I mean, for me, I think Libera's touched on this. I think it's a foundational problem. What I mean is, it's a fundamental problem. So we've been living under this climate of arbitrariness since the military regime. And so power rests, we see this thing purely from a prism of power. So who has power can utilize that power in any way they deem fit. And they can always claim it's in the public interest. And also we, as followers, as citizens, having suffered under this arbitrariness for so long, we kind of like accept it, which is why you hear people saying, "Oh, people deserve it," until it's them that it affects. So it's a big problem. I'm not quite sure that we have tested some of the provisions in law, in courts. I think that, like David said, this issue of the Land Use Act, that's something that I think that any serious government, maybe in the next election, should really, really look at in terms of how do you reform that particular piece of legislation. Because it's something that, you can't, we talk about capital, raising capital, when land doesn't belong to you, which is a fundamental aspect of raising of development is capital. So when that is clearly at the whims and caprices of one man, then we have a problem. I think
Sorry, I was just going to say that.
Go ahead.
Okay, so what I want to applaud though is because I'm beginning to see that the vision of the future looks like name and shame might be our, public court, way of, because his advocacy is like sarcastic, but in a way, it might be the only thing that gets to them. Because I noticed that as much as Wike was trying to act like sticks and stones may break my bones, when the public started crying out against him, he started beating a retreat. So that may be the only, weapon we have against people who are so thick-skinned that they're operating as if they have a tanker or whatever armory around themselves. So, again, I have to commend your advocacy. I feel you really landed a proper punch right where it deserved to be landed.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think we need...
Is it possible to say one last thing? Because
yes,
I just
please.
I just saw a news report of in Rivers State where the PDP people had an event. Was it yesterday or day before yesterday where there was no social distancing. At that event.
I expect Wike to go and destroy the hotel also.
And he was there as well.
Oh,
and
okay.
The governor was
See the
there
hypocrisy.
as well. So, I mean, it's just,
That was,
do you pick and choose which law or that you choose to, enforce.
Yeah.
It's just, it's
you remember I talked
laughable.
about Fuki Akindele and then the Attorney General last week.
Yeah.
It is the same thing with Wike here. And anyway,
I think you always run that risk when you're being draconian that you're going to end up falling by the same rule that you're pushing against.
Anyway, from what we gather, it's a bribe gone sour, but we'll talk about that some other time. Well, the most that time can permit us on this segment. Saying it like it is the one option left to us when faced with serious odds. Emeka certainly set out to do this after the break. Go on, Emeka.
So this week, I'm going to be talking about the deadly cost of incompetence and compromise, which is really basically where we are in this country. It was Lance Morrow, the Pulitzer Award-winning journalist, American journalist, who wrote in Time magazine an article, I think it was just after the June 12th crisis, that Nigeria then, as now, is ever standing on the precipice. And yet somehow, each time, we manage to keep just, moving along. In his words, Nigeria is a country where the worst never happens and the best is impossible. So clearly, Nigeria is a country born of what I consider the lowest form of compromise, designed to serve the interests of beneficiaries that are not the citizens of Nigeria. And that's what we find every day. And so over the years, all our systems are driven from this wheel of compromise and never competence. From education, security, agriculture, to even our national politics. It's indeed the politics of mediocrity that drives most of the choices we make as a nation, especially political power, when it comes to political power. It's always not the best woman or man for the job. It's often that person who is less threatening, even if less qualified. In fact, less qualified. It's what they will often choose, more able to obey. So, you wonder why Nigeria, which has produced some of the best and the brightest in any field of endeavor, still cannot produce enough electricity for its people. I think the answer lies squarely in the politics of compromise and incompetence, which we have elevated to a high art. And for those who remember, in Lagos, why should Lagos have barges to generate electricity? And so let's frustrate Lagos or force them to share power to other parts of the country. Why should there be a working free port zone in Calabar when other regions don't have? So we have a situation where even if we have enough resources to build one world-class hospital in Benin City, for example, in the current spot of compromise, the question would then be, what happens to other zones? So let's frustrate Benin and make sure we share the money equally, and eventually nothing gets built anywhere. So instead of building competence, we elevate a sickening quota system of compromises. Today, as countries far less qualified or equipped with resources are finding ways of dealing with this corona pandemic, we're busy making excuses for our incompetence, which is now killing Nigerians. Senegal, for example, has shown us how serious a country should deal with the pandemic, using skills and resources of its people to build testing kit treatment centers. And today, the country is reporting more people tested, the lowest number of deaths and infections compared to Nigeria. Even Ghana has tested over 100,000 people and has announced plans to build 80 new hospitals in towns and villages without one. But in dealing with our national security, we also resort to compromise and indeed elevate regime loyalty. And today we are witnesses to the consequences of the choices we make and hold dear. The fear that I have for our country, Nigeria, is that eventually it is Nigeria that will kill more people than COVID-19 through compromise and incompetence. And this incompetence rises from the decisions we make daily. That is the real enemy. The real enemy is incompetence and compromises. We should squarely take aim at this and find ways of dealing with this culture of chronism, and so that we can get our country moving back to the path of development and growth. That's it, guys.
Thank you.
For me, spot on advocacy, and the way out of all of this, because you find that out when you clamor for the youth to take the center stage, there are no mentorship.
Okay.
And so the only thing they see out there, we majority of them see, are the mentors that they see in music, the entertainment industry. And so no political mentorship. And so when you clamor for youth to take the center stage, they pick out the worst amongst you. And then, use that as, a template. And so all of you now will be pointing at that one as, oh, is that man not a youth? Is he not a youth? So after all, you ask for youth. Yeah, he is, but yet he's not competent. Rather, we should be asking, this is not the best of the youth that you could get. So why bring this worst one? We have better and brighter youths. It's the same thing, in all facets. The first thing we ask for, where is he from? What religion does he practice? Rather than, is he competent to do the job? Those are basically, and now our political leaders know these things. So they divide us along that lines. Why is it that when they are together, when the going is good, they don't quarrel? Be it APC, PDP, EDC, CPC, all of them, they don't quarrel. When it is time to share a common patrimony, they are all united. How come when you talk about, a section of this country have been so marginalized, yet this section of the country have leaders who are also representing them at the center, and these people are not complaining? But the day they get kicked out of the sharing pots, that's when they now begin to complain. They say, our people. So they drag us along. So we should, my advocacy is, we should understand that, all of these people are not with us. So once we see the truth, the only way, if you say incompetence, fight incompetence, irrespective of who is involved. Not because, your brother is there, whether he's competent or not, anyway, he's there. Let him just remain there.
I mean, coming in on that, because I know I could hear you agreeing with him, is to say, I always try to say, okay, what precedes the attitude? Because attitude doesn't just materialize by itself. Why is it that we have it in abundance in Nigeria? And I feel that before you start adopting an attitude where you rather subscribe to compromise and incompetence, you must have believed a lie. Somewhere along the line, because I even see it on smaller organizations, forget politics, you see where instead of people building together, they think that their enemy is their, colleague or whoever, and you start pulling in different directions, you're all going to lose out. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. So somewhere in our psyche, we've believed a lie, and this belief of a lie doesn't start with the politicians. It's something that's recycled on a daily basis. It's now a cultural thing. If you go on social media, you see how people trade words based on, I don't know, they prefer to be angry with the other person based on some sort of vagueness. Oh, you're Igbo, oh, you're Yoruba, you're Hausa. You don't even know what the person really believes. So somehow we really believe that lie. It's like a poison in our souls. And so I agree with you, Emeka, but I would target my enemy at that lie that somehow divided is the way forward. We need to understand that we have more in common with your brother, than you have, that separates you.
I agree. Can I say something here?
Yeah.
Sorry to cut in briefly. This is a very short advocacy, but I think it goes back to what I said at the very beginning of this advocacy. It's really how, in my view, how the country was set up ab initio. It was set up based on a foundation of compromise. I mean, so it wasn't set up to produce the best in us. Always.
But we can take responsibility henceforth. We can't keep blaming our foundation.
I mean, until you fix it. And we talked about this on this show several times, about restructuring, about setting the country on the right path.
In fact, David, come in before we slaughter it. What are your thoughts?
I mean, so personally, I think a big part of the reason, and a lot of the time when I have conversations on these issues, I always end up going toward childhood. And there's a reason for that. The things we are raised to believe in Nigeria are kind of a foundational problem that at some point we're going to have to take a look at. I can speak for myself. The first time in my life that I saw that I had words, like I spoke to someone who was a Muslim, I think I was about 7 years old. For the first 7 years of my life, I don't think I'd ever met a Muslim, and I had a very, the idea that was fed to me was that they had horns going out of their heads or something. Wow. They were not good people. And then I remember I had a classmate, his name was Laolu, and he became a really good friend of mine.
And he was a Muslim.
And it wasn't like, there's a big deal about him being a Muslim. Then I realized that, he's just like me. It's just that he happens to go to this place called a mosque. So, but that division that was fed to me.
I'm assuming your parents fed it. Why did they feed it to you? Because it has to start from somewhere.
Again, so I don't know if you heard of something called the five monkeys experiment.
Okay.
Where basically,
I think I have.
Yeah, so the story behind the experiment is that someone puts 5 monkeys into a cage, puts a banana on a raised platform,
and then
any monkey,
stories passed down from generation to generation.
So basically, all the 5 monkeys eventually are replaced, and none of the new 5 monkeys knows why they are still beating up anyone.
There's the same story of
but they keep on repeating that same
soldiers
action.
guarding a slab for more than 30 years.
Yes, I heard that one. So how do we reverse it
But
then?
the thing is, because I grew up in an environment where you have Muslims and Christians, I can recite the Fatiha. I've recited the Fatiha on this program before, and I read some part of the Quran. It wasn't a big deal. Those days, those of us that grew up, where there's Salah celebration, we celebrate together. Where there's Christmas, we celebrate together. We still, the problem is, like Emeka said, a faulty foundation.
Okay.
When Boko Haram started, people who understood that Boko Haram was not Islamic, rather than them to come out and push the message that this is not an Islamic thing, they all kept silent and maintained a conspiracy of silence because it favored them at that time.
Okay.
And so for those who didn't know, said, well, this is an Islamic thing. And then that election also, rather than us pushing the right narrative, because we want to win election at all costs, and there are no rules.
Exactly.
Even where there are rules, they are observing breach.
Exactly.
You find out that at the end of the day, these rules are jettisoned completely. And so people now soak in what they hear, during this period. That's basically it.
Well, I guess the essence of Emeka's message is shine your eye, yo. No point walking blindly towards a cliff. Interestingly, my message has a similar moral. After the break, I'll tell you more. Taking responsibility is a necessary first step to turning over a new leaf. I'm going to be talking about how Nigeria is producing motherless babies. There is a term that has become increasingly commonplace during this period of the global fight against the pandemic. And no, it's not social distancing, but taking responsibility. It is in light of this that I want to make a bold assertion. Nigeria is producing motherless babies. And by Nigeria, I mean every one of us that make up Nigerian society. My sister recently shared an article with me that recounted how a desperate Nigerian girl ended up selling her baby boy rather than return home pregnant to face the music of shame and possible disownment. Note that this was after she was advised that an abortion would be both dangerous for her and the baby. It is a real tragedy when a society functions in such a way that it creates a culture that consistently puts people between a rock and a hard place. The layered betrayals that make up this tragedy of that young girl's story are notably the male counterpart or exploiter for impregnating and abandoning her, her parents for instilling in her a greater sense of fear than love, extended family members, and the larger community for constructing a narrative of stigma and condemnation rather than redemption, government for not providing or supporting organizations that give such people a way of escape, but rather forces them to make the less than upright choice. From the baby traders who run the baby factories to the respectable couples who are ready to buy these babies on the black market, all, as far as I'm concerned, are culpable. We're not even speaking of the constant presence of poverty in the land that makes options like baby factories part of the demand and supply chain. An article written by the Vanguard in 2016 states that record number of baby factories were raided or closed down in the southeastern states of Abia, Anambra, Ebonyi, Enugu, and Imo that year, according to NAPTIP. It states that recorded data showed that a total of 14 were discovered in the first 9 months of 2016, up from 6 in 2015 and 10 in 2014. There are also more recent data. We're also told that newborns were sold for up to $5,000, whereas the mothers of the babies were given as little as 20,000 naira or 50,000 naira. I have previously heard stories of young girls who find themselves pregnant after suffering the trauma of rape, only to be abandoned by their family and ostracized by society. But for the odd good Samaritan, many of these young ladies are suicidal, and I shudder to think of the avenues their limited options have led them to. You and I must cease to look the other way in these matters. We must rather seize the opportunities we come across to share compassion when we meet people who are essentially victims of their society. We are that society. And it is we who can change the narrative by any means necessary. It's time we all took responsibility.
Yeah, taking responsibility, first and foremost, the security and welfare of the people, is the government's responsibility. And in ensuring that security and welfare, if you break it down a bit further, there's need for proper education, orientation, and sanctions. But when all of these are failing in society, it becomes a lawless one. And I always say it, in a state of lawlessness, it is illegal to be law-abiding. We ought to. Dr. Helen Paul came out to say that she's a product of rape. And today she's a proud PhD holder, and she's a model. She's everything rolled into one. How come we are not using her? I did an advocacy on her once here. How come we're not using her to tell a story? How come government is not using her to, push this narrative that, you can't, sometimes some of these things happen, but you shouldn't throw away the baby with the bathwater.
Literally.
You have religion and cultural beliefs also that nobody is questioning. And so the more you push this religious belief and cultural beliefs, the more you create fear in the mind of these young people. And with
even the couples who are adopting through the black market.
Yes, through the black market.
Because there's a stigma that they don't have their own child.
Yes, that they don't have their own child. And then government processes also are very cumbersome. And, so until government sit down and look at this area and say, oh, this is a menace. This is a big menace that is waiting to explode in our face. And we need to take responsibility and checkmate it. We will just talk, and at the end of the someday, some of these people will be involved, and then it will be too late to actually checkmate at that time.
So my own angle specifically is with regards to what you mentioned about the fact that some of these ladies actually can't go home. Yeah. After whatever, whether it was consensual or not, and then they get pregnant and they can't go home. For me, this speaks to one of the biggest issues that I have with the current constitution of Nigeria. As I'm sure you're aware, the rights that women have access to in Nigeria are significantly fewer than those that men have access to. So, for example, if I remember correctly, a married woman is not allowed to apply for a passport on her own without her husband's
Okay, Gina, I'm not
permission.
even aware of that.
Yes, so there are lots of these issues. So where I'm going with this is that this is a society where both culturally and legally, a woman is less of a person than a man. And where that is a problem is that where a woman ends up pregnant in a situation where she's out of wedlock, and to be clear,
raped.
To be clear, these things will happen. These things have always happened. They will always happen. There's no any conversation about this that tries to adopt this moralizing tone is a waste of everybody's time, because these things will always happen. Many of us are products of many of our parents didn't tell us. So let's just be very clear about this. So babies being conceived and born out of wedlock is a thing that has always happened and will continue to happen. As long as humanity exists, it will not stop. So the issue then is, how do we protect the women? So how do you give them access to certain rights and resources such that they don't end up vulnerable, and then they end up being poached by these baby factory operators
I agree with David. Sorry to
no,
jump
please
in
do.
But I wholeheartedly agree with David. I think my point is the fact that there's a role for government, and I think that is really where government should come in and take some of that responsibility from two sides, from providing a safe location counseling, a platform where people who have that challenge can go to and get proper counseling and get proper care. So that's one area, because I think that we treat these people, especially the young women who are facing this challenge. There's a failure of in terms of the cultural stigma that they face. Government should not be also. Because you also find it's like going to a police station, like David saying, you're a woman, you go to a police station to complain that some guy molested you, and then the policeman will start asking, but what did you wear, or how can you be out later? This, and then almost like victim shaming the person. But I think government should be should take a position where the role of government is actually becoming a safe haven for people that are vulnerable like that, and providing them with, and of course, the issue of more public advocacy should come on from secondary schools and all kinds of positions where this sort of things are likely to happen, to find ways in which we can provide a lot more information to them, to the young people, and not just the young women, but also the young boys, also in terms of having more education about being sexually active and sexual health and all those kind of things are important things, because people take a position that even providing young people with information or education about sexual health is shameful.
Emeka, quickly, like David had said, whether you provide information or not, these things will happen.
Oh, absolutely.
We have. Wait. I agree.
Human nature.
I agree. We have Ministry of Women Affairs. We have Ministry for Youth Development. We have Ministry of Education. These various departments should collaborate in these sectors to say, it is not enough to say we close down a baby factory. You close one, 3 will spring up somewhere. And they are always located in remote areas. They always have people. You have people who are homeless. Why are they homeless? And so if government is able to provide social security for somebody, and he knows that, look, even if I have a baby, I can get a job, I can have access to a home, I can take care of that baby, there will be no need to want to sell the baby to somebody else. But when you look at the circumstances, you don't have a home, you don't have a roof over your head, you don't have
Liberous, sorry to cut in.
Please do.
You're describing a situation of poverty then. So it's more of, this is the causal thing is poverty. Poverty is driving a lot of people.
Not just this. No, I'm talking about solutions. I'm talking about solutions, not just the cost now. Take, for example, as a young man in the UK, as a young lady, you can apply for a council flat. And even
so that independence you can have.
If you have that independence, there's a limit to how vulnerable you can be. And so there's need for government to begin to look at these areas. How do we ensure that we create, these platforms, these cushion, these opportunities, so that you can assess these things, even if your parents reject and refuse to accommodate you.
Let me even give some insight, because I'm pursuing, I know I did the advocacy, but I'm pursuing this matter beyond just doing an advocacy. And because I know people who are directly involved, particularly one lady who gets lots of these young ladies and she's just acting like a good Samaritan. One lady was gang raped, and yet she had to run away from her family because the family were, she was really afraid of them. But she was saying that even the government bodies, and I don't know if she'll go on record to say this, even the gender affairs, when they get these babies off the motherless babies' homes, they literally sell the babies themselves. So they're selling them 1-point-something million. They're giving these girls those pittance. Why don't they at least come up front, give the girls enough? She's saying they should at least pay the girls rent for maybe 6 months, so the girls can be up on their feet and learn a trade and help them. Because if you really want to help them, they know what to do.
Ekene, that's because there are no sanctions. You have a commissioner, a minister who comes on board, he's looking for loopholes to create avenue to make money. That's why he or she is in government.
Nobody is overseeing.
And so nobody is overseeing him. And then when you complain, you're looked at as a nobody, no rights. And so who are you to complain? After all, they are doing you a favor by even giving you 200,000 for a baby you can't take care of. They are that arrogant. And so if there's responsibility, criminal justice system also need to be effective in this. And I know Lagos State government has a department for this, but it is not enough to just have a department. If you create special courts where matters such as this are tried timelessly and people are sent to jail for such offenses, then we would know that we have started somewhere. Because a situation where you have, all of this, even the government is culpable, government officials are culpable, then there will be no hope than for these young ladies to sell the babies. And then the guys also, nobody is talking about them, nobody is holding them responsible. A situation where your son impregnates your house help and then you send the house help away from home,
Oh, boy.
and nobody is taking responsibility. The
ownership.
state, the police also, because you're a rich man, the police comes and then they sweep the matter under the carpet. We can't continue like this as a society.
Just quickly feeding into
quickly.
that. I remember
because we're about to round up on this segment, but go ahead.
He also made a point about the fact that sexual education is not just for girls, it's for boys
Yeah.
too. And I remember reading a few weeks ago an account of a lady who is involved with an NGO that does sexual health education for secondary school students. And she said she went into a classroom, I think it was an SS2 classroom, an SS3 classroom. And it was about consent, what they were discussing that day. And she said throughout the 30 minutes that she spoke, she saw discomfort on the faces of the boys in the class. Like real discomfort. They were uncomfortable.
Because they hadn't heard it before.
Because basically she was trying to explain to the girls in the class that
They can say no.
Yeah, and that if you said no and this happened anyway, then you were raped.
In case you didn't know.
So-
Okay, sorry, we have to stop it there. We're out of time on this segment. To accept responsibility, it helps if others point out to you your blind spots. We rely on your feedback for this. On homework can be smart work. Oladile Dosumu has a lot to say, and he says, it's about time they started trusting their employees. Working from home is becoming the norm. If employers employ the right caliber of people in the first place, then micromanaging like they do in Nigeria will have to stop. When you employ the right people, give them the chance to actually show their abilities, as long as there are checks and balances in place. It's a win-win situation. A lot of Nigerian employers think they have to be smartest in their business. Like Steve Jobs said, it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and tell them what to do. We hire smart people to tell us what to do. Please say it some more, Oladile. I like the sound of what you're saying. Foreign versus traditional gods is still gathering momentum amongst you. Emeka, take notes. Airward Forson says, we need more of this kind of talk. This is one of the talks we Africans should have. Okay. Also, AW says in capital letters, of course, and your leaders or presidents are the overseers of the colonial masters' estates, which you call country. Africa is still a slave colony now, wow, and there is a solution to it. It's a soft power of awareness, love, and unity. Oh, what a way to go, AW. Didn't see that coming. Do keep your comments coming in on Facebook, Plus TV Africa, hashtag #TheAdvocateNG, or on Twitter and Instagram @Plus TV Africa, hashtag #TheAdvocateNG. To catch up with previous broadcasts, go to plustvafrica.com/TheAdvocate. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Plus TV Africa. After the break, David will be charting the course of our democracy. Over to you, David.
More democracy or less? The debate that our future hinges on. A debate that has recently captured the Nigerian public's imagination, especially in the light of my Rwandan adventure late last year, is, does democracy serve a developing Africa well, or is the so-called benevolent dictatorship the way forward for us? Do we do it the Botswana way, or do we do it the Rwanda way? Do we have sustainable progress via consensus, or quick progress via military fiat? I always make the point that post-independence African dictators, whether perceived as benevolent or otherwise, all fail to achieve the goals that dictatorship is supposedly optimized for, all of them without an exception. Whether it was Thomas Sankara or Mobutu Sese Seko, dictatorship really has no spectrum of good to evil because it always results in the same things. And these things are disregard for rule of law, intolerance of political opposition, development of a personality cult, and eventually, inevitably, the dreaded corruption. Now, Mobutu, Idi Amin, and Mengistu of Ethiopia might have specialized in open villainhood. Everyone knew that these are bad guys. But the thing is, even the supposed good ones, like Thomas Sankara, also ended up misusing their power and oppressing people. So in Sankara's case, he favored setting up show trials where the defendants were not allowed legal representation and they were hit with unreasonable punishments, including ludicrously long prison terms and fines. Now, conveniently, his political enemies tended to end up on the wrong side of these things, and that's funny, huh? The regular counterpoint to this is, well, we've had democracy since 1999, and what has it done for us? And to this, I have one clear and simple response, and that is what we Nigerians have known as democracy since 1999 is only democracy in the most general sense of the word. The first civilian president in the Fourth Republic was General Olusegun Obasanjo. Well, retired general, if that makes you feel better. The next was the brother of Shehu Yaradua, another prominent military figure. The third was a rank outsider who was quickly booted out when the empire struck back in 2015. And the fourth, well, we all know him very well, don't we? The actors are almost exclusively derived of the military era, and the apparatus of state is still configured toward military dictatorship. If you don't get the scale of Nigeria's sheer lack of any kind of democratic tradition, consider that Nigeria only passed a Freedom of Information Act under a non-military affiliated president within the last decade for the first time in its history. In other words, the point I'm making is that the problems Nigerians have with the current political system are the results of dictatorship, not democracy. The reaction to the perceived failures of civilian administration to get the results we want to see should not be to hanker after the military jackboots that hamstrung their civilian successors in the first place. I wrote recently about General Murtala Mohammed's unilateral gutting of the civil service in 1976, which effectively destroyed the country's central institution by removing its knowledge bank and instituting a grab-all-you-can ad hoc culture. The results of that boneheaded dictatorial decision still live with us today under what is, at least in name, a civilian administration. So our dissatisfaction with these problems should not impel us to go back to our proverbial Egypt, craving for a strong man to come and sort everything out in his strong, unilateral, unquestioned, process-free, and unaccountable wisdom. I mean, this would seem to be a basic point of logic and common sense from my point of view, but unfortunately it seems as if the penny really has not dropped with a significant number of Nigerians and indeed Africans. In case the point I'm trying to make is not clear enough, I will reiterate in plain English. The solution to the problems associated with democracy as we know it is more democracy. Dictatorship is never the answer, except the question is, do you want to go back in time and die of toxic nostalgia? It is not easy to accept the annoyances and responsibilities that come with democracy, but life is never easy, and Africans of all people should know that.
I really appreciate your history lesson because some of these people, like Sankara, I hadn't actually come across until I came across your script. So, but I do know Idi Amin because we watched the horror. There was a movie version. And
Idi Amin was a bad guy.
Heads in fridges.
Sankara was
no, but they made a movie about Idi Amin. Heads in, yeah, because actually when I read up Sankara after that, you could see that the guy bothered to set out a vision. He would write things about women's rights. He would write things about how he saw nations.
And he actually achieved a few things.
But really, the crux of the matter is the guy derailed, not because he didn't set out with an intention to be a good man, but because, again, no checks and balances, which I have to weigh into the same scale as you. Dictatorship cannot work for anybody, whether in the Western world or in Africa or wherever. Once you leave one man without any checks and balances, it's a recipe for disaster. He will eventually abuse it. Even if he doesn't do it initially, as time passes, he will abuse it. So you have to respect people like Nelson Mandela for just setting a limit on their own time because they don't want to become toxic, and people around them will not tell them.
He operated, yeah, he wasn't a dictator.
No, but he determined that he wouldn't do second term, and that was the safest thing to do. So I think, going back to your rivers of wickedness, we need to also be aware when we look at people who are operating without checks and balances, whether in our homes or in our offices or wherever, that is where the danger lies. A bit like Emeka's trying to target incompetence. I will take a step behind that and say, where you can put checks and balances, put checks and balances. Because
sorry, Emeka, please permit me to quickly do this. In agreement with you completely, if we had allowed democracy, no matter as faulty as it was in the First Republic, as faulty as it was, if we had allowed it to thrive, like you said, the best way out of the problem of democracy is more democracy.
Or the right kind of...
No, because if we had allowed it, we probably would have fumbled, wumbled, and stumbled. By now, you will have a system in place that would have grown out of those problems. Mistakes. But at every point, we run back to our proverbial, to use your word, Egypt. And then we go back, you bring a supposedly military benevolent person who ends up, becoming a dictator. Like
but were we not secretly dreaming that our present president will operate like a dictator and just
that's for some people. That's for some people, not for some of us. Dari Babarisa once wrote an article. He said, knowing when to die. that some of these dictators knew when to die. If Murtala Mohammed had not died when he died, he probably would have been worse than the worst dictator we've ever had. You talked about the issue of some PAMSEC said they were on their way to work when they heard their name on radio, sacked. And so that introduced psychophancy, warming up to a federal commissioner. You know, before then, if a PAMSEC could disagree openly with a governor, a federal commissioner, because that wasn't his true. But when he knew that he could be sacked over the radio, he would have to kowtow. So this was how we gradually destroyed all of the institution. And now you begin to look for one Jerry Rawlings who will come and right the wrong. No, we need to consistently continue on this trajectory to get it right. And do you think if we were in a military dictator, you and I would be in this dictatorship?
Doing a program like
no
this.
matter how benevolent, you and I would be in this studio discussing. It's impossible.
Yeah.
And so, with all its faults, democracy is still the best for us. Go. And we still need to just trudge on and fine-tune it as we go.
Emeka,
I completely agree with David, with liberals, with what you guys have said.
What of me? You're not agreeing with me, Emeka.
I agree with you as well. But let me say this, though.
It's not presumed, though.
Let me drop a little caveat. And the point is this, and we've seen it. Democracy can also lead to a dictatorship. Let's just get that. We saw what happened in Germany that led to after the First World War and with Hitler's the rise of the Third Reich. So it is possible for people to manipulate a democratic government into a dictatorship, and that can happen. So I think the most important thing is that it's the values of democracy that we need to work a lot more on in terms of getting the citizens to participate, to understand that, because again, the other point before I come back to this is that understanding that development is one thing, because you can also develop as a country under a system of government that is not democratic. So let's also understand that.
Yeah, we saw that because in Nigeria.
Because China, I just want to separate the two, because people often say, like David said when he started his advocacy, that people will make the thing that, look, we've operated under democracy since '99. Where has that gotten us? So that is we need to sort of distinguish two things. Distinguish them. Yes, under democracy, it's a thing about your humanity is given a voice.
Yeah.
You're able to. It's not often perfect. Democracy is really it's how humanity functions. People have a voice.
Yeah.
If you even if in this situation where on a domestic level you're a parent, you're a father, and you operate in the most autocratic, despotic own home environment.
Yes.
Trust me.
No matter how much.
But sorry, Emeka, let me come in very quickly because I want you to continue.
No matter how much development you bring to that home, no matter how much toys or buildings or you bring to that home, when there is no humanity in that home, it's not the same.
Yeah.
And then
I just taking from when you said, democracy is giving a voice to humanity. I feel that we also, again, back to my theme of taking responsibility, maybe that's my lockdown motto. I feel that a lot of times when people are comfortable and we have to take responsibility ourselves as the middle class or upper class, however we see ourselves, people seem to be able to just divorce themselves from the pains of others.
Yeah.
How can we be happy in a country where there's so much illiteracy, there's so much poverty? The voice of others, especially the ones who are disenfranchised, should bother us day and night. And that's why the chickens are coming home to roost. If we're in a country where the majority of the population are not enlightened thinkers, that's why a few people are able to oppress the majority. So we should make it our priority, those of us who have access to education, access to whatever it is we have, we will not be happy until others join us. So then you have a majority voice who will not stand for the rubbish that's
which is why David is raising this advocacy. It's a voice. It's a way of educating people. The extent,
but
the mileage.
We can't be passive. Those of us who have managed to put generator in our house, jeep in our...
I agree with you. So that's why also Emeka is saying, let's distinguish between what democracy is really about.
Yeah.
Not about the development, not about building roads.
Many. Yeah.
It is about humanity. Because you can build these roads, you can put all the best structures in place, and yet the people are not free.
Yeah.
There is no humanity
Yes, being lifted up.
Being lifted up.
Yeah.
So it's all about fear. It's,
Yeah.
you know. So we need to really understand what democracy is about.
Yeah.
And so once we understand it, we can preach the message
Yeah.
of democracy.
And not be happy
It's
that
a voice.
you have your own voice.
Yes.
What about the others?
So maybe you want to.
My last word that I'll just.
It doesn't have to be your last.
I'll just point out that, so people often point to China as the example of the country that developed without democracy and is supposedly doing fantastically well. And I'll also add, I just want to say that if there's a Canadian city called Vancouver, which recently introduced a tax on empty houses because their real estate market was being distorted by wealthy Chinese people coming in and buying up their real estate. Now, there are so many Chinese people coming from China and parking their money in Canada that city had to enact that legislation. Why are they doing that? They're doing that because no matter how much economic growth is happening in China, no matter how much money they're making, no matter how many roads and high-speed roads they're building, they are not free.
Yeah.
So they're trying to escape to
they send their children to Canada. Their children become
school.
Canadian citizens.
Yeah.
And settle down there. You know, and then the parents are back home
under a democratic
Shanghai or
system.
whatever. Exactly.
Yes.
So democracy is the gold standard of the human condition.
Democracy is about asking questions. When your leaders go wrong, you point it to them that you challenge them, yes. You challenge them that this is not the way to go about it. It's about voice, about humanity.
Let me add that because we mentioned China, we mentioned all of these Western countries, and people tend to think that democracy is Western. But I'm an Igbo man, and one of the things of being an Igbo person is a fundamental democracy that in Igbos that we have. So it's not. I want to put it in perspective because it's not. So when people say that's why the Igbos say Igbo Enweze, the Igbos have no king.
I don't even think it's limited to the Igbos. I think it's a human.
No, I'm just saying. I mean, I have to use an example that I'm comfortable that I understand. Yeah.
So that was my first outing on The Advocate, and already it feels like home. No wonder, it's all about our Commonwealth. Keep your comments coming in on Facebook at +TV Africa, hashtag TheAdvocateNG, or on Twitter and Instagram at +TV Africa and hashtag TheAdvocateNG. To catch up with previous broadcasts, go to plustvafrica.com/theadvocate. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, +TV Africa. Until next time, when the topics will be fresh but familiar, let's keep advocating for a better society. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
5 panelists, 5 topical issues, no holds barred.
For me, it's not knowledge that's lacking. It's that greed. It's that mentality where you feel you deserve to take your own and take it infinitely and let everybody else just manage however they will manage.
We're almost becoming hardwired to try and cheat. I would, suggest that we begin to hold our leaders accountable.
There was a time in this country when things actually work.
I don't think that any organization should be above the law. And I think one of the challenges we have in this country is about governance across the board.
What I'm saying is that it doesn't really affect us in Nigeria. That's really
It does.
I don't know what we can do if the system is already corrupted.
We've been warned as a continent of the influx of the Chinese. If you don't repay your debt, they will just colonize you.